The detective cornered me against the wall and said, "Confess, or I'll make you." The fluorescent lights above buzzed softly, flickering every few seconds like a heartbeat refusing to die. I sat in a cold metal chair, hands clenched tightly on my lap, watching the reflection of my own nervous face in the glossy surface of the interrogation table. It was my third hour in this room. No clock, no window, only silence thick enough to crush every thought I tried to hold on to. I told myself I had nothing to fear, that I hadn't done anything wrong. But the moment Detective Kang Hyun-woo walked in, that fragile confidence shattered. He wasn't what I expected. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a crisp black shirt that looked too sharp for a detective, he carried himself with a calm intensity that made the air heavier. His dark eyes met mine like twin blades, cutting straight through me, searching, judging, learning. "Park Ji-hoon," he said slowly, letting my name roll off his tongue as if testing how it felt to say it. "You were the last person seen near the Han River warehouse before the fire started. You want to tell me why?" His voice was low, steady, the kind that demanded answers without needing to raise itself. I swallowed. I told the other officers everything. I was just walking by. I didn't see anything. He didn't move. Didn't blink. Only stared. Then, with deliberate slowness, he took a seat across from me and leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "You didn't see the flames? The smoke? Or the man who ran out before the explosion?" My throat tightened. I heard shouting, but I didn't see his face. He tilted his head, eyes narrowing slightly. "That's not what the witness said." A chill ran down my spine. I wanted to ask what witness, but something about the way he looked at me made the question die in my throat. For a moment, silence returned. Only the faint hum of the air conditioner filled the space. Then he leaned even closer, and I caught the faintest scent of coffee and rain on him. "You know," he murmured, "the truth has a way of showing up in people's eyes, even when their lips are sealed." My pulse jumped. I forced myself to look away, pretending to fix my gaze on the table. "Are you trying to scare me, detective?" A small smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. "If I wanted to scare you, I'd turn off the lights." I hated the way he said my name, too soft, too familiar. It sent an involuntary warmth crawling up my neck. He stood suddenly and began pacing behind me. The sound of his boots echoed through the room, each step deliberate, heavy, controlled. I felt him stop right behind me, so close I could feel the air shift with his breathing. "Why are you really here?" he asked quietly. "I told you. Don't lie to me." The command in his tone made me freeze. I turned slowly, meeting his gaze. His eyes weren't angry, they were curious, searching for something deeper. I felt my voice shake. "I didn't start that fire, detective. I swear." He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Maybe not. But you're hiding something. I can feel it." "Feel it?" I repeated, my voice almost a whisper. He smiled faintly, leaning down until our faces were only inches apart. "It's part of the job. You learn to read people. Their tone, their heartbeat, even the way they breathe when they lie." My breath hitched. "So what does mine tell you?" He stared at me, long enough that I forgot to breathe. "That you're scared, but not because of me." I didn't know what to say. He was right. The truth wasn't about the fire, it was about something else entirely, something I couldn't risk him finding out. He walked back to his chair and sat down, the tension between us thick enough to choke on. "I'll give you one more chance, Ji-hoon. Tell me what you saw." I hesitated, then looked up. "And if I don't?" He leaned forward, resting one arm on the table. His voice dropped deep and quiet. "Then I'll make you." The words shouldn't have sounded the way they did. They should have been a threat. But the way he said them, low, husky, almost intimate, sent an unfamiliar shiver through me. My heart pounded so hard it felt like the whole room could hear it. I took a slow breath, trying to steady myself. "You really think I'd confess to something I didn't do?" He smirked again, eyes dark and unreadable. "You'd be surprised what people confess to when they're cornered." I could barely look at him. His confidence, his calm, the way every word seemed carefully chosen, it made me feel naked in ways I couldn't explain. Finally, he stood again and turned off the overhead light, leaving only the small lamp on the table between us. The shadows deepened, framing his sharp jawline, his piercing gaze. Do you believe in instincts, Ji-hoon? He asked softly. Sometimes. My instincts tell me, he paused, walking around to my side, that you're not guilty. But you're protecting someone who is. I turned to face him, but he was already too close again. His presence filled every inch of space between us. I could see the faint scar along his jawline, the softness of his lower lip, the faint stubble on his chin. His hand brushed mine, just for a second, and electricity shot straight through me. You shouldn't do that, I whispered. Do what? Get close to suspects. He smirked again. You stopped being a suspect 5 minutes ago. I didn't realize I'd been holding my breath until he stepped back and said, You're free to go for now. He walked to the door, opened it halfway, then looked back over his shoulder. But I'll see you again soon, Park Ji-hoon. Something in his tone made me believe it wasn't just about the case. When I finally stepped out of that interrogation room, my knees were shaking. The cold night air outside the station hit my face, but it did nothing to cool the fire Hyunwoo had left burning in my chest. I told myself it was fear. The fear of being watched, of being suspected, of secrets too dangerous to spill. But when I closed my eyes that night, it wasn't the warehouse or the flames I saw. It was him. His eyes, his voice, the way he said my name. And deep down, I already knew this was only the beginning. 3 days passed since that night in the interrogation room, but Detective Kang Hyunwoo never left my thoughts. No matter how hard I tried, his voice still echoed in my head, that low, steady tone that could melt ice and command fear in the same breath. I told myself I was being foolish. He was just a detective doing his job, nothing more. But when I closed my eyes, I could still feel his hand brushing against mine, that electric jolt that made my pulse quicken. And that look, the one that said he already knew parts of me I'd never shown anyone. I tried to drown it out with work. I painted until dawn, lost in colors and shadows, but somehow every portrait began to look like him. The shape of his jaw, the sharpness in his gaze, the loneliness I'd caught behind his confidence. It was almost midnight when I finally stepped away from my easel, wiping paint off my fingers. Rain tapped against the window, and the sound wrapped around the apartment like soft static. I made myself a cup of coffee and curled up on the couch, hoping the caffeine would keep my thoughts from wandering back to him. That was when I heard the knock. At first, I thought I imagined it, soft, but deliberate. 3 times. I hesitated before getting up, heart pounding. It was late, too late for visitors. Who is it? I asked, standing just behind the door. The pause. Then a familiar voice. Detective Kang Hyunwoo. Open the door, Ji-hoon. My breath caught. I hesitated for a second longer, then unlocked the door. He stood there, soaked from the rain, his dark shirt clinging to his frame, hair dripping water onto the floor. Even disheveled, he looked annoyingly perfect. Detective? What are you doing here? He stepped inside before I could finish the sentence, shutting the door behind him. The scent of rain and faint cologne followed him in. Following a lead, he said simply, shaking the water from his hair. A lead. I raised an eyebrow. You mean breaking into people's homes at midnight? Only when they refuse to answer my calls, he replied, his voice calm but his eyes sharp. I froze. Calls? I didn't see any. He gave a quiet hum, scanning the apartment with slow precision, the kind of gaze that missed nothing. You live alone? Yes. Convenient. His tone was unreadable. He walked further in, his eyes settling on the half-finished painting propped against the wall. My stomach flipped. It was a portrait of him, or at least of his shadow, the suggestion of his face hidden behind dark brush strokes. He tilted his head. Interesting choice of subject. Heat rushed to my cheeks. It's not what it looks like. I just... Think about me often? He interrupted, his lips curving slightly. I wanted to deny it, but the words got stuck somewhere between my throat and my pride. You're full of yourself, detective. Maybe, he said, stepping closer, but I'm also right. The distance between us shrank until I could feel the warmth radiating from his body. My pulse quickened, and I cursed inwardly at how easily he affected me. Why are you really here, Hyunwoo? I asked, deliberately using his name for the first time. His gaze softened for a brief second, but his tone stayed guarded. Because I think someone's following you. That caught me off guard. What? He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small photo, blurry, but enough to make out a man standing near my building's entrance. This was taken an hour ago. He's been showing up near your apartment for days. A chill crept up my spine. Who is he? We don't know yet, he said. But until we find out, I don't want you alone. I tried to steady my voice. So you came to protect me? He looked at me, long, deep, unblinking. Would that bother you? Something in the way he said it made my breath hitch. His voice wasn't professional anymore. It was personal, raw, edged with something unspoken. I don't need protection, I whispered. I just need the truth. He took another step closer. Then stop hiding it. I turned away, walking toward the window just to put space between us. The rain blurred the city lights outside into streaks of gold and gray. My reflection in the glass looked smaller than I felt. You think I'm lying? He didn't answer. Instead, I felt him behind me, his presence unmistakable. He moved closer until his breath brushed the back of my neck. Every time I ask you about that night, he said quietly, you flinch. You look away. You shut down. Why? Because you look at me like I'm the one who lit the match. Maybe I look at you like that because I want to understand you, he said. And because you make it impossible. I turned around quickly, maybe too quickly, and found myself inches from him. The air between us felt heavy, charged. His eyes flicked down to my lips for just a second before meeting my gaze again. Hyunwoo, I breathed. He said nothing. His hand lifted, almost hesitantly, until his fingers brushed a streak of paint still smudged on my cheek. You missed a spot, he murmured. The touch was so light, it barely existed, but it burned. I could smell the rain on him, feel the warmth of his skin through the air. You shouldn't be here, I whispered, though every cell in my body screamed the opposite. I know, he said, his thumb still near my jaw. But I couldn't stay away. Something in me broke then, or maybe it finally gave in. My heart thudded hard against my ribs, and the silence between us turned unbearably intimate. He exhaled slowly, lowering his hand, stepping back just enough to give me space, but his eyes never left mine. Get some rest, Jihoon, he said quietly. Lock your doors. I'll check in tomorrow. He turned toward the exit, but before he reached the door, I found my voice again. Hyunwoo. He stopped, hand on the knob. Thank you, I said, though what I really meant was don't go. He looked over his shoulder, that faint smirk returning, but softer this time, almost tender. You can thank me when this is over. Then he was gone, leaving the scent of rain and the ghost of his warmth lingering in the air. For a long time, I stood by the door, trying to steady my breathing. The city outside was quiet now, but my chest wasn't. I didn't know whether to feel safer or more exposed. I finally sat down on the couch again, staring at the painting of him, the one I hadn't dared to finish. My fingers itched for the brush, but I didn't reach for it. Not yet. Because I already knew, if I picked it up now, I'd start painting what I really saw tonight. Not the detective, not the case, not the fear. But the man who said he couldn't stay away. The rain hadn't stopped for 2 days. Seoul looked washed in silver, wet streets, neon signs blurring in puddles, and a sky too heavy to breathe under. I told myself I liked the sound of the rain. It hid things. It drowned out thoughts. It kept me from hearing his voice in my head. But it didn't work. Every drop against the window just reminded me of him. Detective Kang Hyunwoo. The man who walked into my apartment soaked to the bone, accused me of hiding something, and then touched my face like he already knew the secret I was too afraid to say. I hadn't seen him since that night. No calls. No knocks on the door. No messages. I told myself I didn't care, but I found my eyes drifting to my phone more often than I wanted to admit. When I finally stepped out that evening to clear my head, the rain was a mist, soft enough to walk through, cold enough to sting. I kept my hood up and my hands buried in my pockets, trying not to think about the photo Hyunwoo had shown me. The man outside my building. The one he said had been following me. Maybe it was real. Maybe it was just another way for him to keep me close. I didn't know which possibility scared me more. I was passing a narrow alley when I heard footsteps behind me. Purposeful. I turned, just a blur of movement, a tall figure in a dark jacket moving through the shadows. My heart lurched. Who's there? No answer. I started walking faster, then faster still until the alley opened onto a quiet street, and that's when someone grabbed my wrist. I spun around, ready to pull free, but the voice that came stopped me cold. Ji-hoon. Rain glistened on his face, dark hair plastered to his forehead. Detective Kang Hyunwoo. I let out a shaky breath. You scared me. You shouldn't be out here alone, he said, his tone sharper than usual. He's been near your building again. I frowned. You mean that guy in the photo? He nodded once. My team's been watching him, but he's careful. He knows when we're close. He looked like he hadn't slept, eyes shadowed, shirt damp, jaw tight. But beneath the exhaustion, there was something else in his expression. Something raw. Why didn't you tell me earlier? I asked. Because you would have run again, he said simply. Run. I blinked. From who? From you. His silence said more than words could. The rain thickened, drumming against the pavement. He moved closer, his hand still around my wrist. I told myself I came here to keep you safe, he said quietly, but that's not the whole truth. My pulse stuttered. Then why did you come? His eyes met mine, steady, dark, vulnerable in a way I'd never seen before. Because every time I tell myself to stay away from you, I end up here anyway. For a second, the whole city disappeared. There was only his voice, the rain, and the warmth of his hand against my skin. Hyunwoo. He stepped closer, close enough that I could feel his breath through the rain. Tell me the truth, Hyun, he said, his tone low. That night at the warehouse, why were you really there? I swallowed hard. I told you. Don't lie to me again. His words weren't angry this time. They were pleading. I looked down, my chest tight. I was looking for someone. Who? I hesitated. My brother. He blinked, surprised. You never said you had a brother. Half-brother, I corrected softly. We didn't grow up together. He was involved with the people who owned that warehouse. I went there to talk him out of something stupid. But when I got there, it was already too late. The fire, my voice broke. He didn't make it out. Hyunwoo's expression softened instantly. The hardness drained from his posture, replaced by something gentler, almost protective. Ji-hoon. I didn't tell anyone, I said, shaking my head. I didn't want them to think I was part of it. I didn't want you to look at me the way everyone else did. He moved closer until he was right in front of me. You think I'd see you that way? I don't know what to think anymore. He sighed and reached out, brushing a wet strand of hair from my forehead. You should have told me. Would it have changed anything? Yes, he said quietly. Because then I would have known why you looked at me like you were drowning. I froze. What? He gave a small, humorless smile. You think I don't notice? Every time I get close, you look like you want to run and stay at the same time. The rain fell harder. Water clung to his lashes, slid down the line of his jaw. I couldn't look away. Maybe you're right, I admitted. Maybe I do. He exhaled slowly, his hands still hovering near my face. Then stop running. Before I could respond, thunder rolled across the sky, and he stepped even closer, closing the last inch of space between us. My back met the wall of the alley, cold and wet, but I barely felt it. His eyes searched mine for permission, for something unspoken, and when I didn't look away, he leaned in. The kiss was hesitant at first, cautious, as if he was afraid I might disappear if he pressed too hard. But then it deepened, the kind of kiss that makes time bend, that pulls every unspoken word into a single breath. His hand slid to the back of my neck, holding me there like he'd finally found the truth he'd been chasing. I could feel his heart pounding through the soaked fabric of his shirt, his warmth cutting through the chill of the rain. When we finally pulled apart, we were both breathing hard. The world felt quieter somehow, as if the storm itself had paused to watch. Hyunwoo, I whispered. You shouldn't have done that. I know, he said, voice low, rough. But I don't regret it. I wanted to say something, anything, but all I could do was stare at him, at the way the streetlight caught the glint of rain on his lips. He stepped back slightly, his expression unreadable again. You need to go home, he said gently. It's not safe out here. And you? He smiled faintly. I'll be fine. I'm the one who's supposed to do the protecting, remember? I hesitated, then nodded. Will I see you again? He looked at me for a long moment. "You will," he said softly. "But next time, I hope you tell me everything." He turned and started walking down the street, his figure fading into the curtain of rain. I stood there long after he disappeared, my lips still tingling, my heart pounding with something that wasn't just fear anymore. When I finally reached my apartment, I peeled off my wet jacket and sank onto the couch. Outside, thunder rumbled again, low and distant. I touched my lips. They still felt warm. The truth between us had started with lies, with suspicion and silence. But tonight, under the rain, something had changed. Something had broken open. And as much as I tried to convince myself it was wrong, one thought refused to leave me. I wanted to see him again, not as a detective, not as a suspect, but as the man who kissed me like he already knew I'd never forget him. Sunlight filtered through the thin curtains, painting golden stripes across the room. I blinked a few times, trying to orient myself, my mind still foggy from the whirlwind of last night. The first thing I realized wasn't the soft hum of the city outside or the faint scent of coffee drifting through the air. It was the warmth beside me, steady, familiar, and utterly disarming. Hyunwoo. He was asleep on the couch, head resting against my shoulder, one arm draped loosely over mine. The soft rise and fall of his chest, the peacefulness on his usually stern face, made my heart ache in a way I hadn't expected. I swallowed, carefully so as not to wake him. Last night had changed everything between us. The memory of the rain, the alley, and his lips against mine made me flush. It wasn't just a kiss, it had been an acknowledgement of something we'd both been avoiding, the tension, the longing, the connection we couldn't deny any longer. I traced a finger along his arm, careful, hesitant. His skin was warm under my touch, grounding me in the reality of the moment. I wanted to say something, to break the silence with words that made sense of what had happened, but my throat felt too tight. Instead, I watched him, memorizing the way the light caught his lashes, the slight curve of his lips as he shifted in his sleep. For a moment, I allowed myself to imagine a life where mornings like this weren't fleeting, where we could linger in each other's presence without fear or consequence. A soft groan broke my reverie. He stirred, opening one eye, then the other. "Morning," he said, his voice low, roughened by sleep. "Morning," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. My heart was racing faster than I could control. He stretched slightly, rolling onto his side so that he faced me. His dark eyes met mine, and for a heartbeat, the world outside the room ceased to exist. There was no detective, no case, no danger. There was only him, the man who had stood by me through fear, rain, and uncertainty. "You stayed," he said softly, almost as if he were asking permission. I trailed off, caught in the weight of his gaze. I didn't know where else to go. His lips curved into the faintest smile. "Good," he murmured, "because I don't want you to go." My chest tightened. I could feel the sincerity behind his words, the vulnerability he never let anyone see. For the first time, I saw him not as the relentless, commanding detective but as the man who had carried his own fears and doubts, who had chosen to be near me despite them. I reached out slowly, brushing a hand along his cheek. "You didn't have to stay," I said, though my voice betrayed the relief and warmth I felt. He leaned into my touch, closing his eyes briefly. "I wanted to," he admitted. "I needed to. You can't imagine how hard it is to walk away from you when all I can think about is keeping you safe and making sure you know I'm here for you." I swallowed hard, unable to speak for a moment. There was something intoxicating in the honesty, in the way he wasn't afraid to show the part of himself most people never saw. "Hyunwoo," I said finally, my voice shaking slightly. "I'm glad you stayed. More than I can say." He reached out and intertwined his fingers with mine, the contact sending a shiver down my spine. "Good," he whispered, "because I'm not going anywhere. Not now. Not ever." The words were simple, but they carried a weight that left me breathless. I wanted to believe him, to let myself feel safe in the warmth of this quiet morning. For a long while, we just sat there, hands entwined, breathing in the silence together. No pressure, no expectations, just presence. I could feel the lingering heat of his body, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, and for once, I allowed myself to rest. Eventually, he tilted his head, his dark hair falling over his forehead, and gave me a teasing smile. You look like you've been thinking too much. I rolled my eyes but couldn't suppress the small smile tugging at my lips. And you look like you sleep through anything, I teased back, though my heart was still racing. He chuckled softly, a sound that felt like home. Maybe I do, he said. But last night I couldn't. I kept thinking about you, about the way you looked when you realized I wouldn't let go. I blinked, heat rising to my cheeks. You mean when you kissed me in the alley? He nodded, leaning closer. That moment, it told me everything I needed to know. That you feel it too. I struggled for words. How could I explain the swirl of fear, desire, and relief that had consumed me since that kiss? I do. I didn't know how to admit it. Not to you. Not to anyone. He reached up, brushing my hair behind my ear with a tenderness that made my chest ache. You don't have to say it out loud, he said softly. I know. I feel it too. And in that simple admission, I felt a weight lift. The tension, the fear, the uncertainty. For the first time in weeks, I could breathe. Not because the danger was gone, but because we were here. Together. I leaned my forehead against his, and we sat in the quiet morning, letting the warmth of our closeness speak louder than any words could. You really do make me nervous, I admitted finally, a small smile breaking through. He smirked. I like that. It means I matter to you. I laughed softly, a sound I hadn't realized I'd missed. You do. More than you know. He tightened his grip on my hand, pressing his thumb against mine. Good. Because I don't plan on letting go. Not after last night, not after this morning. You're not alone anymore, Ji-hoon. Not while I'm here. I felt tears prick the corners of my eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming relief of finally feeling seen and understood. I rested my head on his shoulder, closing my eyes. Thank you, I whispered. For staying. For everything. He pressed his cheek against my hair, quiet for a moment before answering. No thanks needed. Just stay with me. I will, I murmured. For the first time since that fire, since the lies, and since the fear that had haunted me, I felt safe. Safe in the presence of the man who had cornered me, who had kissed me, and who had somehow managed to make the world feel like it had stopped, if only for a morning. And as sunlight warmed the room, I knew one thing with certainty. Whatever came next, whatever challenges or dangers awaited, we would face them together. Because last night had proven one truth. Sometimes, the heart knows before the mind can even catch up. And mine had already chosen him.